When Walter and Mabel Hayes were forced out of the cabin they had built with their own hands, their children called it mercy. They said the stairs were too steep for Walter's knees. They said the winter nights were too cold for Mabel's lungs. They said two people their age had no business living alone at the edge of Cedar Ridge, where the forest pressed against the windows and storms could knock out power for days. But Walter knew what mercy looked like. It did not arrive with a real estate agent standing beside their kitchen table. It did not come with papers already marked where an old man was supposed to sign. And it did not whisper about a resort developer before asking where his wife would sleep. Mabel never raised her voice that morning. She only sat with her coat buttoned wrong, one hand pressed against her chest, the other resting on the worn wooden table Walter had sanded smooth 42 years earlier. When their oldest son slid the papers closer, she looked past him, toward the window where she had once watched her children chase fireflies in the yard. That was the moment Walter understood. They were not being protected. They were being removed. So, at 79 years old, with one truckload of belongings, a coffee tin of savings, and Mabel sitting beside him in silence, Walter bought the only place in Bellwether County nobody else wanted, an abandoned fire lookout tower on the ridge above town. The county sold it for $11. His children laughed when they heard. The courthouse clerk asked if he understood the tower had no plumbing, no heat, no safe stairs, and no reason left to exist. Walter only said, "Some things look useless because people stopped looking up." On their third night inside that swaying wooden room above the trees, Mabel noticed one floor plank near the old stove did not sit like the others. Beneath it was a sealed smoke pipe wrapped in oilcloth. Inside was a message from the night of the Cedar Ridge Fire. And at the bottom of that message was a name Walter had not heard since childhood, a name his father had been forbidden to speak. By morning, the old couple understood something terrible. The town had been saved once before, but the person who saved it had been erased. And if you have ever seen an older person treated like a burden instead of a human being, stay with this story until the end. Because what Walter and Mabel found in that forgotten tower was not just a secret from the past. It was proof that some lives are only called useless by people who never bothered to look closely. Long before anyone called Walter Hayes unsafe, he had been the man people called when the forest changed its mind. He could stand on the porch before sunrise and tell Mabel whether the day would bring dry wind, mountain rain, or the kind of heat that made pine needles sound brittle underfoot. He knew which birds went quiet before lightning. He knew the smell of smoke before it became a column in the sky. For 38 years, Walter worked as a ranger and fire spotter around Cedar Ridge. He never thought of it as heroic. To him, it was a job made of patience. You watched, you listened, you trusted small signs before they became disasters. Mabel used to tease him for bringing the forest home in his pockets. Pine cones on the dresser, folded maps beside the sugar jar, bits of red flagging tape forgotten in his coat. Their cabin began as 3 walls, a roof frame, and a promise. Walter built it in the first year of their marriage with second-hand lumber and borrowed tools, while Mabel held the ladder steady in the autumn wind. He sanded the kitchen table himself from a slab of oak a neighbor had thrown away. Mabel sewed blue curtains for the front window because every house needed one thing that looked like sky. They were poor in those early years, but not empty. Mabel planted beans along the fence. Walter split firewood after long shifts, his hands cracked from cold and sap. Daniel learned to walk by gripping the table legs. Laura took her first steps toward the blue curtains, laughing at the fireflies outside. Walter and Mabel did not give their children everything. They gave them what they had: warm beds, clean clothes, packed lunches, a father who came home smelling of smoke and earth, a mother who could turn almost nothing into supper for 4. When Daniel wanted a truck for college, Walter sold the fishing boat he had spent 2 winters repairing. Neither of them called it sacrifice. That was simply what love looked like when there was not much cash in the drawer. During fire season, Mabel helped at the ranger station when extra hands were needed. She answered phones, wrote down reports, made coffee strong enough to keep exhausted men standing, and learned the language of radio static. The year of the Cedar Ridge Fire, Daniel was 9 and Laura was 6. Everyone in Bellwether County remembered that fire, though few remembered it the same way. Walter remembered the sky turning copper before noon and ash falling on the porch like gray snow. Mabel remembered the radio crackling after midnight, a weak voice cutting through the static, saying the wind had turned. She wrote the words down because that was what she had been trained to do. North break. Smoke twice. Get them off the lower road. By morning, the official story had already formed. The county commissioner had given the warning. The sheriff had made the right call. The town had been saved by men with clean shirts and microphones. When Mabel asked about the voice she had heard, the station chief told her she must have misunderstood. Too much smoke, too much fear, too many signals crossing at once. Walter's father was there that day. He came to the cabin after the evacuation, soot on his collar and a look in his eyes Walter never forgot. When Mabel mentioned the warning from the ridge, the old man stiffened. Then he took Walter beyond the woodpile and said, "Some names are safer left buried." Walter asked whose name. His father did not answer. After that, life moved on. The forest grew green again. The children grew tall. Walter retired with a watch, a handshake, and a back that ached when rain was coming. Mabel's lungs weakened, but her memory stayed sharp. The cabin aged with them, the porch sagged, the blue curtains faded. The steps Walter had built began to complain under his weight, but every mark in that house still meant something. The dent near the stove was from Daniel's toy truck. The scratch on the table was from Laura learning to write her name. Their children saw none of that when they returned. They saw equity. They saw liability. They saw two elders standing in the way of an easier future. And that was why, when Walter climbed the abandoned lookout tower with Mabel at his side, he was not only looking for shelter. He was looking for a place where memory still mattered. Daniel called before the kettle boiled, and that was how Walter Hayes knew something was wrong. His son never called early. But that Tuesday, his voice came through the phone careful and polished. "Dad, Laura and I are coming by today. We need to talk about some things." Walter looked toward Mabel, who was sorting pills into a plastic tray by the window. "What things?" "Health things, house things, planning things." 3 harmless words, put together like a fence. Daniel arrived before noon in a dark SUV. Laura came behind him with a covered dish, as if food could soften whatever they had brought. A stranger stepped from Daniel's passenger side carrying a leather folder. He introduced himself as Mr. Pritchard from Holloway Land and Development. "Development?" Walter asked. Daniel smiled too quickly. "Let's sit down before we make this harder than it needs to be." That was the first insult. The idea that Walter was the one making things hard by asking why a land agent had come into his kitchen. They sat at the oak table Walter had sanded himself. Mabel did not remove her coat. One button sat in the wrong hole. One hand rested near her chest because the damp had settled in her lungs overnight. Laura noticed and used it like evidence. "Mom, this is exactly what we're talking about," she said. "You shouldn't have to fight for breath in a house like this." "A house like what?" Mabel asked. Laura swallowed. "An old one." Daniel opened the folder. Inside were photographs of the porch steps, the loose gutter, the cracked back window, the black marks above the wood stove. Someone had walked around their home and turned its age into a case file. Walter recognized one angle at once. It had been taken from behind the lilac bush. "You came here when we weren't home." Daniel did not deny it. "We were assessing safety concerns. You were trespassing. We are your children. That doesn't make every door yours." For a moment, Laura looked ashamed. Then Mr. Pritchard slid a paper across the table, and shame disappeared behind business. The plan had a clean name: Transitional Care and Asset Protection. Daniel explained it slowly, as if Walter had forgotten how sentences worked. The cabin would be sold before winter. Walter and Mabel would move into Maple Glen Assisted Living. The sale proceeds would go into a managed family account for medical expenses and future care. "Managed by who?" Walter asked. Daniel looked at Laura, then back at him. "By me initially, with Laura as secondary." Mabel's fingers tightened against her coat. "And if we say no?" she asked. No one answered quickly enough. Mr. Pritchard cleared his throat. "No one is trying to pressure you, Mrs. Hayes. Your children are simply trying to prevent a crisis." Walter studied the papers. Some pages already had yellow tabs where signatures belonged. One tab had his initials printed beside it. Another had Mabel's full legal name typed beneath a clean line. Then he saw the name near the bottom of the purchase summary: Cedar Crown Resorts. It sat in small print, almost hidden beneath parcel numbers, but Walter felt it like smoke in his throat. For 2 years, that company had been buying land below the mountain, promising jobs, tax money, walking trails, and luxury cabins facing the valley. Walter pushed the document back. "This isn't about our health." Daniel's face hardened, then softened again. Dad, don't turn this into an accusation. You and Mom are not safe here anymore. You brought a buyer before you asked whether we wanted to sell. We brought an option. Laura reached for Mabel's hand. Mom, please. What happens if you fall? What happens if the power goes out? What happens if Dad can't get you to the hospital? Mabel looked at her daughter's hand, then at the faded blue curtains. And where exactly are we supposed to go while you protect us? Daniel had an answer ready. He pulled out a brochure for Maple Glen. On the front, two smiling people sat beneath a tree. The dining hall was bright. Even the old people in the pictures seemed polished for selling. They have openings, Daniel said. I already spoke with admissions. Walter felt something inside him go still. Mabel did not open the brochure. You spoke with admissions, just preliminary. And the land company? Daniel's jaw moved. Laura began to cry without tears reaching her cheeks. Walter had seen that kind of crying from people who wanted forgiveness before confessing. There is a deadline, Daniel said. Cedar Crown needs an answer within 60 days. If we wait, the offer could disappear. And frankly, Dad, the property taxes are only going up. Our taxes are paid. For now. Our house is paid for. That doesn't mean it's sustainable. There it was. The word people used when love, memory, and belonging became inconvenient. Sustainable. Walter stood slowly, so no one could claim he was unstable. His knees hurt, his back pinched near the hip, but his voice did not shake. You will take your papers, he said. You will take your agent, and you will leave this house. Daniel did not move. Instead, he reached into the folder and removed a thinner packet. Laura whispered his name. Daniel. He ignored her. Dad, there are other ways to handle this if you refuse to cooperate. Walter looked down. Physician observation. Cognitive concern. Environmental risk. Possible incapacity review. Mabel's face went pale. You would do that? She asked. Daniel held his ground. I would do what is necessary to keep you safe. Walter stared at the son he had once carried asleep from the truck after Little League games. That same boy now sat at the same table, prepared to argue that his father no longer had the right to decide where he slept. Outside, wind moved through the pines, making the branches rub together like dry hands. Mabel reached across the table and closed the packet with 2 fingers. No, she said. It was not loud. It did not need to be. For the first time, Mr. Pritchard looked uncomfortable. Laura looked at the floor. Daniel looked toward the window, already calculating another route. Walter understood this was not finished. Their children would leave today, but they would come back with new papers, new opinions, and some official willing to confuse age with incompetence. When Daniel gathered the documents, one page slipped near Walter's boot. Daniel snatched it up quickly, but not before Walter saw a line across the top. Preliminary incentive payable upon secured transfer. Not care, not merci. A bonus. That evening, after the cars disappeared down the gravel road, Mabel sat at the kitchen table without turning on the lamp. Walter placed the kettle on the stove, though neither of them wanted tea. They'll come back, Mabel said. I know. With someone official. I know. She rested her hand on the scratched table their children no longer saw. Then we leave before they decide leaving for us. Walter turned from the stove. Not to Maple Glen, she said. Not to any place Daniel chose. For the first time all day, the stillness inside Walter became something else. Direction. The next morning, while Daniel was probably calling lawyers and Laura was probably telling herself she had done her best, Walter drove to the county courthouse and asked a question he had never imagined asking before. What did the county have that nobody wanted? The county courthouse smelled of floor wax, old paper, and rain trapped in wool coats. Walter had not been inside that building in years. The last time, nobody had looked twice when he walked through the door. He had been Walter Hayes, the ranger who knew every ridge by name. That morning, the clerk looked at his cane first, then at his face. You're asking about condemned holdings? She said. I'm asking what the county has that nobody wants. She slid a thin list through the opening in the glass. Tax delinquent lots, collapsed sheds, a strip of ditchland near the old highway. Then he saw the line near the bottom. Cedar Ridge Fire lookout. Minimum bid, $11. Walter read it twice. The clerk followed his eyes and gave a tired little laugh. That one should have been torn down years ago. Why wasn't it? Too expensive to remove, too useless to repair. The words stayed with him. Too useless to repair. He took the paper home, folded inside his coat pocket. Mabel was waiting at the table, because waiting was sometimes the only way two people could hold a house together for one more hour. Walter placed the list in front of her and tapped the final line. She put on her reading glasses. The lookout tower. County says nobody wants it. Mabel looked up. That include us? Walter almost smiled. Not yet. She leaned back, studying him with the same expression she had worn 42 years earlier, when he told her he could build a cabin before winter if she did not mind holding ladders. Does it have walls? She asked. Some. A roof? Probably. Water? No. Heat? No. Stairs? Walter hesitated. Technically. Mabel removed her glasses. Then we will need rope, nails, and something stronger than your old coffee. The bid hearing was held 2 days later in a small county room with beige walls and a clock that ticked too loudly. Only 7 people came. 3 wanted parcels near the lake. 1 wanted a shed for tin roofing. 2 came because small towns treated other people's business as free entertainment. Walter sat in the back with Mabel beside him. Daniel found out before the clerk called the first item. He arrived in a suit, breathing hard as if dignity were something he had chased up the courthouse steps. Laura came behind him, pale and embarrassed. Dad, Daniel whispered. Do not do this here. Walter kept his eyes forward. Buy county property? Humiliate yourself. Mabel turned her head slowly. Careful, Daniel. He straightened, and for once, he had no polished sentence ready. When the clerk read Cedar Ridge Fire Lookout, someone near the front snorted. Is that thing still standing? Another man asked. Mostly, the clerk said. A few people laughed. Minimum bid, $11. No one moved. Walter raised his hand. Daniel closed his eyes. The clerk looked over her glasses. Mr. Hayes, you understand the property is sold as is. The county assumes no responsibility for structural safety, access, water, utilities, wildlife intrusion, injury, weather exposure, or removal costs. I understand. No certificate of occupancy. I understand. No guarantee the stairs can hold weight. Walter felt Mabel's hand close over his sleeve. I understand. Any other bids? Silence. The gavel sounded smaller than Walter expected. For $11 and a recording fee that cost more than the property, Cedar Ridge Fire Lookout became theirs. By supper, half of Bellwether County knew. At the gas station, a man asked Walter if he planned to grow wings before moving in. Someone taped a note outside the post office that read, Senior housing now available. 1 ladder, no roof, great view. Eli Turner took it down before noon. Walter saw him do it from the truck. Eli owned the hardware store, though most people still called it Turner's. He was 68, broad through the shoulders, with a white beard and a limp earned in a volunteer fire crew years earlier. He crumpled the note and dropped it in the trash. People get brave with paper, Eli said. Walter nodded. They get brave with folders, too. Eli glanced toward the truck, where Mabel sat with a bag of nails in her lap. You really buying that tower? Already bought. Then you'll need joist hangers, exterior screws, roofing tar, gloves thick enough for splinters, and somebody to tell you which steps not to trust. You offering? I know that tower better than most folks who laugh at it. Eli looked toward the ridge. My father hauled water up there one summer. Said the place had more ghosts than nails. Mabel opened the truck window. Ghosts can hold a flashlight if they want supper. Eli laughed once, surprised and warm. That afternoon, Walter drove the old truck up the logging road with Mabel beside him and a toolbox rattling behind the seat. Branches scraped both doors. Twice, Walter had to drag fallen limbs aside. Every few minutes, the trees opened enough to show Bellwether below them. Then they reached the clearing. The tower rose from the ridge like something the forest had tried to swallow but never finished. 4 timber legs stood on concrete footings cracked with moss. The stairs climbed in sharp angles around the frame, several treads missing, others bowed in the middle. At the top, the little square room leaned into the wind. Its windows were broken. Rust streaked beneath the sill. A black stovepipe jutted from one wall like a finger pointing at the sky. Mabel did not speak. Walter waited for fear, regret, maybe even anger. Instead, she opened her door. Stay there, he said. She looked at him. Walter Hayes, if you think I came this far to admire it from the truck, age has done more damage to your head than mine. He climbed first, testing each step before putting weight on it. Halfway up, he turned to help her, but Mabel was already following. one hand tight on the railing, her breath measured and stubborn. At the top, the door resisted until Walter shouldered it open. Dust lifted. Wind moved through the broken windows. An old chair lay on its side. The metal stove was rusted red around the seams. Pine needles had gathered in corners as if the forest had been slowly mailing itself inside. Mabel stepped into the center of the room. "Well," she said. "It has a view." Walter almost laughed, but then he saw the nameplate beside the door. Cedar Ridge Fire Lookout, County Fire Service. Established 1931. Below that, 3 names had been stamped into metal. The first 2 were readable. The third had been scratched away so violently the plate was grooved deep. Walter touched the damaged line. Not weather, not age. Someone had erased it by hand. Mabel came beside him. "What is it?" Walter did not answer at first. Down below, the town sat quiet in the valley, roofs shining after rain. Up here, above the trees, an old wound waited in metal. Finally, Walter said, "I think this place remembers something." Mabel looked at the ruined room, the broken glass, the scraped name, and the sky beyond it all. Then she took the key from his hand and set it on the windowsill. "Then we start with the stairs," she said. By late afternoon, the ridge had turned colder than the valley. Walter knew it would. Air changed above the tree line. It thinned, sharpened, and found every gap in a man's coat. Knowing a thing did not make it easier to see Mabel's fingers tremble as she carried blankets from the truck. "We can sleep in the truck tonight," he said. Mabel tucked a quilt under one arm. "And let that room win before dark? It isn't a contest. Everything is a contest when people are waiting to say they were right." So they carried what they had up the crooked stairs one careful trip at a time. A toolbox, 2 quilts, a lantern, 3 cans of soup, a sack of nails from Eli Turner, a broom, because Mabel said no house became a house until someone swept it. Walter took the heavier things, Mabel took the smaller things, though he noticed she stopped twice to steady her breathing. Inside the lookout room, daylight exposed every insult time had left behind. Dust lay thick across the floor. Broken glass glittered beneath the windows. The old stove squatted in the corner with rust around its belly. Rain had stained the ceiling dark in 2 places. Walter cleared the glass first. Mabel swept pine needles into a pile near the door. Then she tied cloth around the worst window gaps. Wind still slipped through, but it no longer came in like an invited enemy. They worked until sunset turned the room amber. For a moment, the tower almost looked kind. Walter stood at the western window, watching the valley settle beneath them. From up there, Bellwether seemed smaller than its opinions. The courthouse clock, the gas station, the rooftops, the black road curling past their old cabin road. Everything that had judged them fit inside the palm of evening light. Mabel came beside him with the lantern. "Can you see the cabin?" she asked. He knew where to look, but he did not point. A thin line of trees hid most of it. "Not clearly," he said. "Good." They ate soup warmed over a camping burner. Mabel insisted on putting the cans into bowls because dignity did not end, because plumbing did. They sat on 2 overturned crates with a blanket across their knees while the wind moved under the floorboards. The tower creaked. Not once, not like a house settling. It creaked in long wooden sentences, from the legs below to the beams above, as if remembering storms it had survived. Walter listened to each sound. A loose brace on the east side, a tired joint near the landing, one board near the stove that answered late when the wind shifted. Mabel watched him listening. "You're making a list in your head." "I am. Put sleeping on it." He looked at her face in the lantern glow. Her cheeks had lost color. Guilt moved through him so suddenly he had to look away. "I brought you to a broken tower," he said. "You brought me away from people who wanted to put my life in a folder. That doesn't make this safe." "No," she said, "but it makes it ours." The words stayed between them while night rose around the glass. Later, after Walter patched the worst window with cardboard, they made a bed on the floor. The quilts smelled faintly of cedar. Mabel coughed twice before settling. Walter waited for a third cough. It came softer. He lay awake long after she slept. Outside, the forest made its night noises. Branches rubbed. Something small moved through leaves below. The tower swayed just enough for Walter to feel the motion in his bones. He should have been afraid of falling. Instead, he found himself listening for a radio that was no longer there. Static. A weak voice. Mabel writing down words no one believed. "North break. Smoke twice. Get them off the lower road." He turned his head toward the stove. In the dark, a shorter length of metal near the floor looked wrong. Walter had noticed it earlier but assumed it was scrap. Now, with the wind pushing beneath the boards, he heard that late answering sound again. Tap. Pause. Tap. Mabel opened her eyes. "You hear it too?" she whispered. "I thought you were asleep. I was married to a ranger for 56 years. I wake when wood talks." Walter reached for the lantern and turned the wick low. The sound came again, not from the wall, but from beneath the stove corner. Tap. The board beside the stove sat a finger-width higher than the rest. Its nail heads were black with age, but the wood around them was cleaner than it should have been. Walter took the pry bar from the toolbox. Mabel sat up, quilt around her shoulders. "Careful. The board?" "You." He smiled despite himself, then worked the pry bar under the plank. The first nail screamed. The second came loose with a small pop. Cold air breathed up through the gap. Walter lifted the board and set it aside. Beneath it was a narrow cavity between the joists. At first he saw mouse droppings, old ash, and a strip of rotted cloth. Then the lantern caught something wrapped in oilcloth and tied with wire. Mabel leaned closer. "That wasn't dropped there." "No." Walter reached in slowly. The bundle was dry, though everything around it smelled of damp wood. Whoever had hidden it knew how to protect paper from weather. His fingers brushed metal. He pulled the bundle free and laid it between them on the floor. The object inside was not large. A sealed section of smoke pipe, capped at both ends, blackened on one side as if it had once been near flame. Around it, the oilcloth had been folded 3 times and tied with a faded strip of ranger tape. Mabel's breathing changed. Walter looked at her. "What?" "I've seen that tape. Lots of men used red tape. Not with 2 knots at the end." She touched it without untying. The old tower crews marked emergency messages like that when radio lines failed. Outside, wind struck the tower hard enough to rattle the patched window. Then Mabel took the pocket knife from the toolbox. Her hands were careful, not weak. She cut the wire, unfolded the oilcloth, and worked one cap loose. A rolled paper slid into Walter's palm. It was browned at the edges but still whole. The writing was cramped, done in pencil pressed hard enough to scar the page. At the top was a date. The 17th of October, 1968, the night of the Cedar Ridge Fire. Mabel covered her mouth. Walter read the first lines aloud. "Wind turned south, southwest. Lower road unsafe. Send 2 smoke columns from North Break. Evacuate mill houses first." His voice failed on the next line. Below the warning, beneath the smoke code and a hand-drawn mark of the ridge, someone had signed a name. Elias Bell. Walter felt the room fall away. He knew that name, not from records, not from town stories, not from any plaque in Bellwether. He knew it from the one time he had heard his father speak in his sleep, begging Elias to run. Mabel looked at him. "Walter?" He could barely answer. My father knew him. The tower creaked around them, but now it sounded less like warning than testimony. Walter looked at the hidden pipe, the old message, the erased name waiting beside the door, and understood that they had not bought a shelter by accident. They had climbed into the one place the past had been trying to speak from. At sunrise, the message looked even older. Night had made it feel like a ghost. Morning made it feel like evidence. Walter laid it on a cleared crate beside the window and weighted the corners with a screwdriver, a soup can, Mabel's pill case, and the old compass he still carried from his ranger years. Mabel put on her reading glasses. "Read it from the top again," she said. Walter did. "Wind turned south-southwest. Lower road unsafe. Send 2 smoke columns from North Break. Evacuate mill houses first." Below that, the handwriting grew tighter. "Line down. Radio failing. If no answer, use pipe draw. Bell to stay until signal seen." Mabel took the paper carefully. "Pipe draw," she said. Walter looked at the rusted stove, then at the capped metal section lying on the floor. "You know what that means? The old crews could pull smoke through a pipe and send it clean above the trees when the wind was wrong. Not for talking, for being seen. At the station, they told us it was outdated, too simple, too unreliable. But someone used it. Someone had to." Walter turned the paper over. The back held a crude map. Ridgeline, creek bed, North Break, Lower Road, and a dark penciled X beside a cluster of little squares. "The mill houses," he said. Mabel nodded. "Families lived there then. There were 3 smoke marks drawn above the North Break, but one had been crossed out. 2 remained. Smoke twice. The phrase in Mabel's old memory had not been fear. It had been instruction. They did not take the message to Daniel. They did not take it to Laura. Children who brought folders before questions had lost the right to handle fragile truths first. They took it to Eli Turner. Turner's Hardware opened at 7 because Eli believed a town that waited until 9 to fix a leak deserved wet floors. Walter found him behind the counter, sorting bolts into coffee cans with labels written in pencil. Eli looked up. "You two survived, night 1. Mabel says the room won," Walter said. "We only negotiated." Mabel set the oilcloth bundle on the counter. Eli's smile faded. "What's that?" "Something from under the floorboards." When Walter unrolled the message, Eli leaned close, then went so still the whole store seemed to notice. He read the warning, then the smoke code, then the name at the bottom. He stepped back. "Where did you get this?" "I told you," Walter said. "Under the lookout floor?" "Near the old stove." Eli looked toward the front windows, as if Bellwether itself might be listening. Then he walked to the door, flipped the sign to closed, and turned the lock. Mabel spoke first. "You know the name. Everybody my age heard it once." Eli came back slowly. "Most learned not to repeat it." "Elias Bell," Walter said. Eli nodded. The name sounded different in daylight. Less like a secret, more like a man. "My father said he was the lookout who abandoned the tower during the Cedar Ridge Fire," Eli said. That was the story. Fire jumped the ridge, radio failed, and Bell ran. Commissioner Harland warned the valley from the county office. Saved the mill houses, became a hero. Walter looked at the paper. "This says Bell stayed. This says more than that." Eli pointed to the marks. 2 columns from the north break meant the lower road was cut off. Anyone who knew the old system would have sent families north through the quarry trail. "Mabel heard the warning on the radio," Walter said. Eli looked at her. Mabel straightened, as if she were back at the ranger station with a pencil in hand. A weak voice after midnight. "He said the wind had turned. He said smoke twice. He said get them off the lower road." I wrote it down. "What happened to that log?" "The station chief took it in the morning. Told me I misunderstood." Eli's mouth tightened. "That log disappeared," he said. "All the old fire logs from that week disappeared. Folks said they were damaged by smoke and water." "Convenient," Mabel said. "Very." Eli went into the back room and returned with a metal lunchbox dented at the corners. From it, he pulled a folded newspaper clipping protected in wax paper. "My father kept this," he said. "He didn't talk about it much, but he kept it." The headline showed the county commissioner in a clean jacket, standing beside exhausted firefighters. "Commissioner Harlan's quick action saves Bellwether Mill District." There was no Elias Bell in the photograph. No lookout tower. No warning from Cedar Ridge. Walter read the article twice. It said the commissioner had personally identified the wind shift and ordered evacuation by telephone. It said the lookout assigned to Cedar Ridge had failed to maintain his post and was presumed responsible for delayed reporting. Presumed, a word clean enough to bury a man without holding a funeral. "What happened to Elias?" Mabel asked. Eli folded the clipping. "Officially, he disappeared after the fire. Some said he ran from shame. Some said he died in the woods. Some said Harlan paid him to leave. But people say all kinds of things when truth gets too expensive." Walter thought of his father whispering beyond the woodpile. "Some names are safer left buried." "My father knew him," Walter said. "He never told me how." Eli looked at him for a long moment. Maybe because knowing him was dangerous back then. "Not with one paper," Eli said. "Not against a story that stood for almost 60 years. But it starts something. It starts trouble." Walter folded his arms. "Trouble already found us." Eli did not argue. Instead, he pulled a roll of brown paper from beneath the counter and carefully wrapped the message again. "First rule, don't carry the only proof around in your coat. Second rule, make copies. Third rule, find something that doesn't depend on memory." "County records?" Mabel asked. "Old maps, payroll sheets, fire rosters, insurance reports. If Elias Bell was assigned to that tower, his name sat somewhere before someone scratched it off." Walter thought of the damaged nameplate beside the lookout door. "It was on the tower," he said. "Third line, scraped away by hand." Eli's eyes sharpened. "Then don't clean it. Don't polish it. Don't let anyone near it with good intentions and a wire brush." Mabel gave him a look. "You think we're amateurs?" "No, ma'am. I think you're honest, which is worse. Honest people assume evidence will be respected. Before they left, Eli copied the smoke marks onto the back of a receipt. His hand shook only once, when he wrote the name Elias Bell. Walter noticed. You afraid of a dead man? He asked. Eli looked toward the ridge through the store window. No, he said. I'm afraid of what living men did to him. On the drive back up Cedar Ridge, Mabel held the wrapped message on her lap, as if it were a sleeping child. Walter kept both hands on the wheel, but his mind stayed with the newspaper clipping, the missing log, the scraped nameplate, and the word presumed. Halfway up, Mabel said. If Elias sent that signal, he saved those families. Yes, and someone let the town call him a coward. Walter drove another 20 yards before answering. Not someone, he said. People. It takes more than one person to erase a name. At the tower, the wind had shifted east. Walter could smell rain beyond the ridge. He stepped from the truck and looked up at the swaying room, no longer seeing only broken stairs and cracked glass. He saw a witness. For the first time since Daniel had placed those papers on the kitchen table, Walter felt something stronger than anger. Purpose. They had not saved their cabin. Not yet. But they had found a man who had lost more than a home. And if Cedar Ridge had kept his name hidden for 58 years, Walter Hayes intended to find out who had been so afraid of it. 3 mornings after Eli locked the hardware store door to read Elias Bell's name, Mabel saw the girl for the first time. Just a flash of movement beyond the lower bend in the logging road, where the trees crowded around a rusted blue sedan with a blanket taped inside the back window. Mabel stopped with a bucket in her hand. Walter. He was tightening a brace on the second landing. What? There's someone down there. Walter looked over the rail. At first, he saw only brush and the hood of the car. Then the girl moved again. She was thin, 17 maybe, with a gray sweatshirt pulled over her hands and hair cut unevenly above her shoulders. She stood as if ready to run before anyone spoke. Walter came down slowly, making noise on purpose. We're not calling anyone, Mabel said. The girl's chin lifted. I didn't do anything. Nobody said you did, Mabel answered. You own this road? No, Walter said. But we own the tower nobody wanted. That made the girl look up. For 1 second, interest crossed her face. Then hunger covered it. Mabel saw that first. She always did. We have soup, she said. I'm not begging. Good. I'm not offering charity. I made too much. Walter glanced at the single pot they had planned to stretch for lunch and supper. But he knew better than to correct his wife in front of a hungry child. The girl hesitated. What kind? Bean. With meat? Not enough to brag about. A small smile touched the corner of her mouth, then disappeared. Her name was Nora Bell. She told them only after the soup was half gone, and only because Mabel asked what name she wanted written on the spare mug. Not where she came from. Not why she was sleeping in a car, just the mug. Nora Bell, she said. Walter's spoon stopped. Mabel did not look at him. She kept her eyes on the pot and asked, With an E? Yeah, Nora said. Bell like a church bell. My grandma used to say that, even though we never went to church. Walter forced his hand to move again. Your family from Bellwether? Used to be. Nora pushed beans around the bowl. Before people started remembering us wrong, the words entered the room like cold air. Mabel set another piece of bread beside Nora's bowl. That happen often? Nora shrugged. Depends who's telling it. They did not ask more that day. Instead, Mabel gave her a blanket. Walter gave her work gloves. If she wanted to stay near the turnout, he said, she could help carry scrap wood and earn food without owing anyone gratitude. Nora looked at the gloves as if they might turn into handcuffs. What do you want fixed? Walter pointed up. Everything. That was how the tower gained its third set of hands. Nora worked like someone who did not trust rest. She hauled broken glass in coffee cans, scraped old paint from the railing, sorted screws by size, and climbed the stairs faster than Walter liked. When Mabel told her to sit, Nora stayed standing until Mabel sat first. Mabel watched her from the stove corner. You've done this before. Done what? Made a place out of almost nothing. Nora's shoulders tightened. My grandma and I moved a lot. Where is she now? Nora's hands paused over a box of nails. Gone. Mabel did not ask whether gone meant dead, missing, or too tired to stay. The word had enough weight by itself. That evening, rain came low over the ridge. Walter patched the east window, while Nora held the lantern. Mabel warmed soup again, and added the last potatoes. For once, the little room smelled less like wet wood and more like supper. Nora stood by the door, watching Walter and Mabel move around each other without speaking much. Walter handing Mabel the spoon before she reached for it, Mabel moving his hammer away from the edge before he noticed. "What?" Walter asked. Nora looked away. "Nothing." Mabel ladled soup into 3 bowls. Nora stared at the 3rd bowl. "I didn't say I was staying." "No," Mabel said. "You said nothing at all. Sit before it cools." The next morning, Nora arrived with a small metal box wrapped in a towel. She placed it on the crate beside the window and stood back. "My grandma said not to show this to people," she said. "But she also said if anybody ever listened about Cedar Ridge, I'd know." Walter and Mabel exchanged a look. "What was your grandmother's name?" Walter asked. "Ruth Bell." The old name settled gently between them. Bell. Not rumor. Not erased metal. Blood. Nora opened the box. Inside were 3 objects. A yellowed photograph, a brass button blackened by heat, and a folded scrap of paper brittle with age. The photograph had been burned along one side. In it, a young man stood beside the lookout tower, one hand resting on the railing. Beside him stood a young woman in a ranger station uniform, laughing at something outside the frame. The back of the photograph held writing in faded ink. Elias and Ruth. Cedar Ridge, before the smoke. Mabel put one hand to her mouth. Nora watched her carefully. "You know him?" Walter answered. "We found his name." Her face changed so quickly it hurt to see. Hope came first, then fear, then anger protecting both. "Where?" "In the tower," Walter said, "hidden under the floor." Nora sat down hard on the crate. "My grandma said he didn't run," she whispered. "She said he stayed because people were still down on the lower road. But every time she told anyone, they said she was defending a coward because she loved him." "Was Ruth his wife?" Mabel asked. Nora nodded. "Pregnant, too. With my grandfather." Walter looked back at the photograph. Elias Bell had not only lost his name, he had left behind a family forced to carry the lie. Nora unfolded the scrap of paper. It was not a letter. More like a line torn from a larger note. "If the smoke rises twice, go north." Below it was a mark Walter had seen on the message in the pipe, 2 narrow columns drawn above a ridge. Mabel's voice stayed steady. "I heard him." Nora looked up. "That night," Mabel said, "on the radio, I heard a man give that warning." For the first time since she had appeared near the blue car, Nora looked young. Not hard, not sharp, just young. "Then my grandma wasn't lying." "No," Walter said, "she wasn't." The tower felt different after that. Not repaired, not safe, not finished. Different. Nora did not move into it. Not exactly. She kept saying she had her car, kept pretending departure was simple. But her blanket stayed folded near the stove. Her mug stayed on the shelf, with Walter's and Mabel's. At night, when wind pushed through the patched windows, she climbed the stairs and sat with them until her shoulders lowered. Walter began teaching her how to read the ridge, how smoke leaned when wind changed, how crows lifted before weather, how pine sap sharpened in dry heat. Mabel taught her how to mend a torn sleeve, stretch a meal, and let silence be peaceful instead of dangerous. One afternoon, while painting the railing, Nora looked around the battered little room and said, almost too softly to count, "This place feels like it's trying." Mabel smiled. "Most homes are." Walter looked at the 3 mugs on the shelf, the photograph wrapped safely in oilcloth, and the valley below. The tower had not given them comfort yet, but it had given them someone to protect, and in doing that, it had begun to breathe. By the 2nd week, the tower no longer looked abandoned from the road. It still leaned. The stairs still complained. Rain still found one corner of the ceiling. But the worst glass had been cleared. 2 windows held new panes bought on credit. The railing had been sanded smooth enough for Mabel's hand. Nora painted the first coat of white on the door. She did it badly. Paint gathered near the hinges and dripped down the frame before she caught it with her sleeve. Walter pretended not to notice. Mabel noticed and said only, "A door that has been shut this long deserves extra." Nora smiled into the brush. That was how their days changed. Walter woke early and walked the platform with his coffee. He tested the wind the way other men checked the morning paper. Mabel made lists at the crate they now called a table. Boards needed, screws left, water stored, food stretched, medicine counted. Nora did the climbing Walter no longer should, and the lifting Mabel no longer could. Eli came 3 afternoons a week, with whatever he claimed had been sitting useless in the back room. A coil of wire, a half-box of flashing, a cracked but working rain barrel. He called it inventory control. The first improvement that changed everything was water. Walter and Eli rigged gutters from the roof to the old barrel and set a screen over the top to catch pine needles. When rain came that Friday, all 4 of them stood inside listening to water run into the barrel outside. It was not much. It sounded like wealth. Mabel placed one hand against the wall. I like hearing a house learn to answer back. After the water came the stove. Eli cleaned the pipe. Walter sealed the joints. Nora hauled kindling. Mabel struck the match. The first fire smoked badly, coughing gray into the room until everyone waved towels and stumbled laughing toward the door. The second fire held. Heat rose slowly, touching the floorboards, then the crates, then Mabel's hands. She did not say she was warm. She took off her coat. News of the tower changed shape in town. People had laughed because an old couple had bought a useless thing. Then they laughed less because the useless thing had windows. Then they stopped laughing entirely when a picture appeared in the Bellwether Gazette. It showed Nora on the platform, paint on her cheek, holding a hammer like she meant to argue with the sky. The caption read, "Old lookout gets second life." Daniel called that evening. Walter let it ring. Mabel watched the phone until it stopped, then returned to sorting beans. "They'll say they're worried," she said. "They are. For themselves." The next morning, 2 men from town drove up with leftover decking. One said his wife had made him bring it. The other said nothing but helped Eli carry it halfway up the stairs. A retired schoolteacher brought curtains she claimed were the wrong size for her kitchen. They were blue. Mabel held them longer than necessary. Nora saw. "We don't have to use them." Mabel ran her thumb over the hem. "Yes, we do." They hung them in the east window. Not the same shade as the cabin curtains. Brighter. More stubborn. By then, the tower had become something Bellwether did not know how to categorize. It was not a proper home, museum, business, or charity. But people began leaving things at the foot of the stairs. Canned peaches, nails, a wool blanket, an old radio with one knob missing. Walter kept a notebook by the door and wrote every name down. "Why?" Nora asked. "So help does not become invisible." The small fire started on a Sunday afternoon. A family from out of county had stopped near the west trailhead, cooked beside a dry ditch, and left coals under leaves. By the time the first smoke showed, dispatch had not received a call. Walter saw it from the platform. At first, it was no more than a pale thread lifting between 2 dark pines. Most people would have mistaken it for dust or someone burning brush too far away to matter. Walter set down his coffee. Nora was repairing a screen. "What is it?" "Wrong color." Mabel came to the window. "Smoke? Too thin for a stove, too low for a chimney." Walter lifted his hand, feeling the air. "And it is leaning east before it rises." Eli, tightening a brace below, looked up when Walter called his name. Within 3 minutes, the tower changed from a home into a lookout again. Mabel took the old radio from the shelf, slapped the side once, and found enough signal to reach Turner's Hardware. Eli called the volunteer fire chief from his truck. Nora ran down the stairs with Walter's marked map, because the west trail was not where the new county map said it was. Walter stayed above, watching. "Tell them not to take Ridge Spur," he shouted. "It is washed out past the culvert. Send them through Miller's Gate." Nora repeated the words, breathless, then disappeared into the trees. Mabel stood beside Walter with the pencil and pad they kept near the window. "Size?" she asked. "1/4 acre, maybe less." "Wind?" "Shifting. Not bad yet." "Fuel?" "Dry needles, fallen limbs. If it reaches the cedar pocket, it climbs." She wrote every word. The volunteer crew reached the smoke before it crowned. They cut a line through the old logging cut, dragged hose from the creek bed, and drowned the fire while it was still small enough for men to curse at. By sunset, the west trail smelled of wet ash, and nobody had lost a house, a barn, or a life. The fire chief climbed the tower at dusk, helmet under his arm. "Dispatch says if you had not called it in, we would have missed the turn." Walter shrugged. "Smoke called it in. I just saw it." The chief looked at Mabel's notes, then at the old map. "Where did you get that route?" "From a man people called a coward," Mabel said. The chief did not know what to do with that, so he thanked them again and climbed down. By morning, the story had traveled faster than smoke. The Gazette called. A regional reporter left a message. The county emergency office asked whether Walter would identify old fire breaks for their updated maps. Daniel called 6 times. "Dad," Daniel said, voice tight. "What exactly are you doing up there?" Walter looked around the room. The blue curtains, the 3 mugs, the old map, Mabel at the table, Nora cleaning ash from her hands. "Living," he said. Then he hung up. That afternoon, while Nora and Eli repaired the signal platform, a rusted bolt came loose beneath the railing. A small metal box dropped from under the frame and struck the boards at Nora's feet. It was flat, sealed with tar, and marked with initials scratched into the lid. "Say hat." Eli saw them and stopped breathing for a moment. "Charles Harland," he said. Walter opened the box. Inside was an evacuation map from 1968, folded around a payroll slip bearing Elias Bell's name. And across the top, in pencil, someone had written one sentence: "Do not file with county records." The first official letter arrived folded too neatly. It was taped to the lower post of the lookout tower in a plastic sleeve, as if whoever left it did not want to climb the stairs or knock on the door of the people it threatened. Nora found it while carrying kindling. "Walter," she called. He came down 2 flights and saw the county seal before he saw the words. "Notice of Safety Review." Mabel read it at the crate table with the calm expression she used for medical bills in bad weather. "Inspection scheduled Friday," she said. "Occupancy concerns, structural concerns, sanitation concerns, presence of unrelated minor." Nora's face shut. "I'm not a minor," she said too fast. "You're 17, Walter said gently. "In 4 months I'm not. 4 months matters to people with clipboards." She looked toward the door, already measuring the distance to her car. Mabel folded the notice once. "Nobody is running because Daniel learned how to use a phone." Daniel arrived the next morning with Laura, a county inspector named Mr. Beal, and Miss Carver from Adult Protective Services. Behind them, a young reporter from the Bellwether Gazette stepped from her compact car with a camera bag. Daniel saw the reporter and lost color. "Who called her?" he asked. Eli, standing by the stairs with a hammer in his belt, said, "Small towns don't need calls. They have windows." Mr. Beal looked up at the tower and made a sound in his throat. "This structure is not approved for residential use." Walter came down to the landing. No one from the county cared when it was rotting for 23 years. That was because no one was living in it. "No one was listening to it either," Mabel said from above. Laura gripped the railing. "Mom, please. This is embarrassing." Mabel looked down at her daughter. "For whom?" The question landed harder than anger. Miss Carver asked to speak with Walter and Mabel privately. Daniel objected, saying he should be present as their son. Miss Carver looked at him over her glasses. "That is not how capacity works, Mr. Hayes." For the first time, Walter almost liked her. Inside the tower, Miss Carver sat on a crate and asked careful questions. Who managed their medication? Where did they sleep? How did they get water? Did they feel coerced, neglected, unsafe, or confused? Mabel answered each one plainly. Walter showed the rain barrel, the stove repairs, the food shelf, the first aid kit, and the notebook where every visitor and donation had been recorded. Miss Carver paused at the notebook. "You write down who helps?" "Yes," Walter said. "Why?" "So kindness doesn't get stolen by louder people." She wrote that down. Downstairs, Daniel spoke in low, sharp bursts to Mr. Beal. The inspector marked the stairs, the stove clearance, the missing handrail, and the lack of certified water. Each mark looked small alone. Together, they began to look like a path to condemnation. Then Laura saw Nora's blanket near the stove. "Is she sleeping here?" "Sometimes," Nora said. Laura turned to Walter. "You cannot just collect troubled children because you feel lonely." The room changed. Walter's voice went quiet. "Say that again after you look at her." Laura's mouth opened, then closed. Daniel seized the moment. "This is exactly what I mean. They are living in a condemned tower with an underage girl, handling old fire debris, giving statements to newspapers, and refusing proper care." The reporter's camera clicked once from the doorway. Daniel spun around. "Do not print that." The reporter lowered the camera. "I'm here because the county is reviewing the same tower that helped identify a wildfire 3 days ago. That is public interest. This is a family matter." Mabel stood, one hand on the table. "It stopped being only family when you brought officials to frighten us." Daniel's face tightened. I brought them because you won't listen. No, Walter said. You brought them because the tower embarrassed you. Daniel laughed without humor. You think this is about embarrassment? Eli stepped closer from the doorway. Maybe it's about Cedar Crown Resorts. Daniel went still. Laura looked at her brother. What does Cedar Crown have to do with this? The reporter asked. Daniel pointed at Eli. He does not know what he is talking about. Eli pulled out a folded copy of the incentive line Walter had seen beneath Daniel's paperwork. Walter had given it to him after Eli insisted honest people needed duplicates. Eli handed it to the reporter. Daniel lunged half a step. That is private. The reporter read silently, then looked up. Preliminary incentive payable upon secured transfer. Laura's face went slack. Daniel, she whispered. He turned on her. Don't start. Mabel's hand closed around the back of the crate chair. You were going to be paid for getting us out. It was a standard relocation incentive. For whom? Walter asked. The buyer or the son? No one answered. The silence did not last long. Mr. Beale cleared his throat and returned to the safest language in the world. Procedure. Regardless of family disputes, this structure has deficiencies. Unless these are corrected within 14 days, I will recommend an emergency closure. 14 days? Nora said. Stairs must be reinforced. Guardrails completed. Stove clearance corrected. Potable water certified. Sleeping arrangements removed until occupancy is approved. Removed where? Mabel asked. Mr. Beale did not meet her eyes. Daniel exhaled, as if the county had just become merciful for him. Maple Glen still has space. Walter looked at his son and understood how quickly some people could turn a deadline into a cage. Miss Carver stood. I will not recommend removal today. Mr. and Mrs. Hayes appear oriented, informed, and capable of making decisions. But the inspector's safety orders are separate. Daniel stared at her. You can't be serious. I often am. Before they left, Laura climbed 3 steps and stopped. Mom, she said softly, I didn't know about the incentive. Mabel did not soften quickly enough to comfort her. You knew about the papers, she said. You knew about Maple Glen. You knew we were not asked first. Laura looked down. That was all the apology she had, and it was not enough. After the cars left, Nora kicked a loose stone into the brush. I can go, she said. That solves one problem. No, Mabel said. You heard him. I heard a man with a clipboard. I have survived worse. Walter unfolded the inspection notice again. 14 days. Stairs. Guardrails. Stove. Water. Sleeping arrangements. Eli took off his cap. We can do some of it. Some won't keep them from closing it, Walter said. The reporter, who had stayed behind, stepped forward. My name is Claire Dawson, she said. I won't publish anything you don't confirm, but if there is a connection between Cedar Crown, the old fire records, and this inspection, people need to see it. Walter looked at Mabel. Mabel looked at Nora. Nora held the rail with both hands, standing in the place her great-grandfather's name had been scraped away. Mabel said, Then they will see all of it. That night, Daniel's voicemail came through Walter's phone 3 times. The final message was not careful. You are making this harder than it has to be. If that tower becomes a legal problem, don't expect me to protect you from what happens next. Walter deleted it without playing it twice. Above him, the wind moved through the new blue curtains. On the table lay the inspection order, the copied incentive agreement, the smoke message, and the map marked Do Not File. For the first time, the pieces were not hiding in separate places. They were touching. And Walter understood that the fight was no longer about where 2 old people were allowed to sleep. It was about who had the right to decide which truths were safe enough to remain standing. The dry storm came 2 days before the inspection deadline. It began without rain. The sky above Cedar Ridge had turned the color of old brass. Heat pressed against the tower windows. The pine needles below gave off a sharp, resinous smell that made Walter stop sanding a stair brace. Mabel saw him lift his head. Lightning weather, he said. Nora looked up from sorting screws. But there aren't any clouds. Not ones that want to help us. By 3 o'clock, the wind had gone strange. It came from the south, stopped, then returned from the west with a hot edge. Walter walked the platform twice, reading the ridges. The forest below looked still, but stillness before fire was not peace. At 4:17, thunder cracked without warning. The strike landed beyond the south ridge. No flame showed at first, only a pale puff rising where no road reached easily. Walter pointed. There. Mabel already had the radio in her hand. The first call brought static. The second brought dispatch, thin and broken. Repeat location? South Ridge, above Miller's Cut, Mabel said. Likely lightning start. Wind unstable. Nearest access? Walter leaned toward her. Not Ridge Spur. It's washed past the culvert. Send them through North Quarry Road, then Old Mill Trail. Mabel repeated it. The dispatcher hesitated. County map shows Ridge Spur as primary access. County map is wrong, Mabel said. Nora grabbed the old evacuation map. I can take this down. They won't listen to a voice on a radio if their map says different. Mabel tied the map in a sack. Go straight to Eli. Make him drive you to the fire chief. Nora nodded, then ran. From the platform, Walter watched her blue car jolt down the road. A minute later, smoke thickened over the South Ridge. Then the wind changed. It did not turn gently. It snapped. The pale smoke bent toward the lower valley, toward the old road below the timber line. Walter's stomach went cold. Below them, a county emergency truck stopped near the base of the tower. Mr. Beale stepped out first, followed by Daniel and Laura. Claire Dawson arrived behind them with her camera. Daniel looked up. Dad, you need to come down. This is not safe. Walter did not answer. He was watching smoke. Mr. Beale shouted. The fire crew is being routed up Ridge Spur. That road won't hold them, Walter called back. They'll lose 20 minutes and come out below the smoke. That is the official access road. It is officially washed out. Daniel cupped his hands around his mouth. Stop playing ranger and get Mom out of there. Mabel stepped onto the platform beside Walter, radio in one hand, pencil in the other. I am exactly where I need to be. Dispatch broke through the static. Tower, confirm alternate evacuation recommendation. Walter looked at the old message spread on the crate behind them. North break. Smoke twice. Get them off the lower road. The same shape of danger had returned after 58 years. He turned to Mabel. Can the old signal platform still draw? We cleaned the pipe. We never tested it. Then Elias will forgive our technique. Walter opened the restored pipe draw while Mabel fed damp leaves, pine duff, and green boughs into the old signal barrel. The first smoke came out dirty and flat, torn apart by wind. Walter adjusted the side vent. Again, this time, smoke rose in a narrow column. 1. Walter waited until the wind took it high above the tower. Then Mabel covered the draw, counted under her breath, and opened it again. A second column rose beside the first. 2 dark warnings above Cedar Ridge. For a heartbeat, the whole mountain seemed to look up. Down below, Claire lifted her camera. Daniel stopped shouting. Laura covered her mouth. The radio burst alive. Tower, we see 2 smoke columns. Explain. Mabel's voice was calm. Lower road unsafe. Evacuate north through Quarry Trail. Fire will cut the main route. A different voice came on. Older. The volunteer chief. This is Chief Ransom. I have Nora Bell here with the old map. We are rerouting now. The next hour became a thing made of commands, smoke, and moving dots below the trees. Nora and Eli led the first engine through the quarry road. The chief sent deputies to knock on mill district doors. Families who had never heard of Elias Bell drove north because an old tower told them to. The fire crossed Ridge Spur exactly where Walter said it would, eating the road in a wall of orange before the delayed county crew reached the culvert. Mr. Beale saw it happen from below the tower. So did Daniel. Laura whispered, they would have been trapped. Daniel said nothing. By dusk, the fire had not been stopped, but the people were out of its path. Crews cut a line at the north break using Elias's map. When the flames reached the break, they slowed long enough for engines to hold them. Ash fell around the tower like dark snow. Mabel's hands were black from smoke. Walter's throat burned. Then Claire Dawson climbed the stairs, coughing, camera against her chest. I recorded the smoke columns, she said. I recorded the chief confirming Nora's map. I recorded Mr. Beale saying the official map was wrong. Eli came up behind her with Nora. Chief Ransom followed, helmet tucked under one arm. Mr. Beale climbed last, no clipboard in sight. The chief placed the old map on the crate. We need to know where this came from. Walter put the smoke message beside it. Mabel added Ruth Bell's photograph. Eli unfolded the newspaper clipping and the payroll slip marked, "Do not file with county records." For once, the evidence did not look fragile. It looked heavy enough to hold a room in place. Claire photographed each piece. Chief Ransom read the signature at the bottom of the message. Elias Bell. Nora lifted her chin. My great-grandfather. The chief looked at her differently then, not as a runaway girl from a rusted car. As someone carrying a name the county owed a debt. Mr. Beale picked up the payroll slip. This shows Bell was assigned to Cedar Ridge Lookout the night of the fire. And the official history says he abandoned it, Eli said. Claire pointed to the map. But this evacuation route is the same one used today, the one that saved the Mill District. Mabel's voice was soft but carried. I heard him on the radio in 1968. He gave the warning. I wrote it down. My log disappeared by morning. Daniel stood at the doorway, face gray in the smoky light. Mom, he said, maybe this isn't the time. Mabel looked at him with a sadness sharper than anger. This is exactly the time. Fire shows what people tried to cover. No one spoke. Then, Chief Ransom removed his cap. My grandfather lived in the mill houses, he said. If this is true, I'm alive because of that warning. Nora looked down at the floorboards. Walter stepped beside her. It is true, he said. And this town let a dead man carry shame that belonged to someone else. Claire lowered her camera. Who was Charles Harland? The commissioner who got the credit, Eli answered. And the man whose initials are on the box that hid Bell's payroll slip. Outside, the second smoke column thinned into evening. Down in the valley, sirens faded. Families were safe. The ridge still burned in places, but the old break held. Mr. Beale looked at Walter, then Mabel, then the reinforced stairs, and the evidence spread across the crate. I will delay the closure recommendation, he said quietly, pending emergency historical review and structural remediation. Daniel turned. You can't just... I can, Mr. Beale said. Daniel had no official language left to hide behind. Walter looked out over the valley where headlights moved north in a slow line of survival. He did not feel victorious. Victory was too small a word for a night that had returned a dead man's voice and saved living families in the same breath. Mabel touched the smoke-stained message. Elias stayed, she said. Nora wiped her face with her sleeve. They'll know now? Walter looked at Claire's camera, the chief's bowed head, the inspector's silence, and his own children standing at the edge of a truth they could not manage. Yes, he said. Now they'll know. Above Cedar Ridge, the last of the two smoke columns loosened into the dark. And for the first time in 58 years, it did not look like warning. It looked like a name rising. The fire burned itself tired before morning. By sunrise, Cedar Ridge was striped with black scars and wet lines cut by crews through brush and pine. Smoke still lifted from hollow logs, but the worst had passed. No houses were lost in the Mill District. No families were trapped on the lower road. The old North Break had held. Claire Dawson's article spread beyond Bellwether County. The lookout they tried to close saved the valley. Below it was a photograph of two smoke columns rising above the tower, and another of Nora Bell holding the old evacuation map. The county opened an emergency review of the Cedar Ridge Fire of 1968. Files appeared where people had sworn there were none. An old dispatcher remembered Mabel's missing log. Eli found men from the mill houses who still remembered being told to run north because the tower smoke said so. The truth did not arrive all at once. It came like water through thawing ground. Slow, cold, impossible to push back once it started moving. On the 7th day after the fire, the county gathered at the base of Cedar Ridge Lookout. Not for demolition, not for inspection, for a correction. A temporary plaque stood beside the stairs, covered with blue cloth. Nora stood near it with her hands clenched in front of her coat. Walter had loaned her his old ranger pin. Chief Ransom spoke first. 58 years ago, a lookout named Elias Bell remained at his post during the Cedar Ridge Fire. Evidence now shows that his warning directed families away from the lower road and toward the North Break. For decades, his name was absent from our official record. Today, Bellwether County restores it. Mabel took Nora's hand. The cloth came off. Elias Bell, Cedar Ridge Lookout, who stayed until the smoke was seen. No one clapped at first. Then an old woman from the Mill District began, softly. Others followed. It sounded like a town trying to return something it had kept too long. Nora cried without covering her face. Daniel and Laura stood near the back. They had not come to the tower since the night of the fire. Daniel looked smaller without his folders. Laura looked as if sleep had been avoiding her. After the ceremony, they approached slowly. Daniel spoke first. Dad, I was wrong. It was a sentence. Not yet an apology. Mabel said nothing. Daniel looked at the stairs, the plaque, Nora, the blue curtains visible in the window above. I told myself I was protecting you. I told myself the house was too much, that the money made sense, that Maple Glen would be easier. And the incentive? Walter asked. Daniel's face tightened. I wanted to believe that was just business. It was business, Mabel said. That was the problem. Laura began to cry, this time without arranging her face first. I should have stopped it, she said. I knew you weren't being asked. Mabel looked at her daughter for a long while. Practical, she said, is making sure your mother has medicine. Practical is fixing a stair before she falls. Practical is asking what she wants before deciding where she belongs. Laura nodded, unable to answer. Daniel tried again. What can we do? For once, the question did not anger Walter. It simply arrived too late to be trusted quickly. You can start by not doing, he said. No more calls to officials without speaking to us. No more papers already marked. No more deciding that age makes our choices temporary. Daniel lowered his eyes. And the cabin? Laura asked. The cabin sale was frozen after Cedar Crown's incentive agreement became public. Lawyers would spend months deciding what could be undone. But Mabel no longer looked like a woman waiting for permission to return. The cabin was our first home, she said. This is the one we chose when everyone thought we were finished. In the weeks that followed, Bellwether learned how to help without taking over. Mr. Beale returned with a list that sounded less like punishment and more like repair. Guardrails were completed. The stove was certified. A proper water system was installed with donations from families who had driven north because smoke told them to. The county granted the lookout protected historical status before Cedar Crown could touch the ridge. Nora moved out of the blue sedan before winter. She moved into the small caretaker room Eli and 3 volunteers built below the tower stairs and enrolled in fire science at the community college. On the first cold morning of December, a new sign went up at the road. Hayes Bell Lookout Sanctuary, a place for those who were left behind to be seen again. There was a room for emergency shelter, a table for hot meals during storms, and a wall of maps teaching children how to read wind and ridge lines. Behind glass, the sealed smoke pipe rested beside Elias Bell's message and Ruth's burned photograph. People came carefully, an old widower whose son had stopped answering calls, a woman sleeping in her car after surgery, 2 teenagers who wanted to see the tower that sent smoke like a voice. Mabel put soup in bowls, never cans. Walter wrote every name in the notebook. Not because everyone stayed, because no one who climbed those stairs would be invisible while he was alive to hold a pencil. Daniel and Laura visited on Sundays, when invited. Sometimes they brought groceries. Forgiveness did not enter the room like sunrise. It came like winter light through old glass. Pale, slow, requiring patience. Mabel allowed hugs. Walter allowed Daniel to repair the lower step, then made him redo it when the angle was wrong. That was as close to mercy as either of them was ready to give. One evening, near the first anniversary of the day they bought the tower, Walter climbed to the platform with Mabel beside him. The new railing held firm beneath their hands. Below, lights glowed in the valley. Above, the sky deepened blue. The blue curtains moved inside. Mabel leaned against his shoulder. Can you see the cabin from here? She asked. Walter looked toward the trees where their old life sat hidden. Not clearly, he said. She smiled. Good. Then someone knocked at the lower door. A small sound. A beginning sound. Walter looked down and saw an elderly man standing beside a suitcase, staring up at the tower, as if unsure whether forgotten people were still allowed to ask for warmth. Mabel touched Walter's arm. He opened the door before the man had to knock again. And above Cedar Ridge, in the lookout people once called useless, a light came on and stayed burning.